Donnie Piercey. Donnie is the 2021 Kentucky Teacher of the Year, and he teaches fifth grade in Fayette County Schools in Lexington. And Donnie graduated from Asbury College and then earned his master's degree from Auburn University, been teaching since 2007. He specializes in using technology to promote student inquiry, learning, and engagement. And over the past 14 years of teaching, those interests have given him the unique chance to represent Kentucky around the world. For example, Donnie was the recipient of the National Geographic Grosvenor Teacher Fellowship to Antarctica. And he also represents Kentucky on the inaugural National Geographic Education Teacher Advisory Council. He's the North American lead for the Google Earth Education Experts Network. Does a lot of stuff. Donnie's been invited to keynote and presented at schools in 33 states on four continents. And in 2017, he co-authored the Google Cardboard book, Explore, Engage, and Educate with Virtual Reality, based on virtual experiences he's created for his students. The bluegrass always calls him home, however, as he regularly leads professional development at school districts all around Kentucky. Donnie currently lives in Lexington with his wife and his 3 children. And as he told me just a few minutes ago, today is his 7-year-old's birthday. Happy birthday to him. All right, so let's turn it over to Donnie. Thank you so much, Donnie, for being here.
No worries. So it's funny, as I was getting ready this morning, I was walking up the stairs. My wife was like, you look like you're dressed for school, which, Fayette County, we've been virtual since last March. So, dressed for school now means like a raggedy t-shirt and, that's pretty much it. So, she made me put on a nice shirt. So I'll let you all guess if I'm wearing sweatpants or dress pants today. I don't know, throw that in the chat if you want. But let me go ahead and share my screen, which I promised myself that I would not use those lovely cliches that we were always saying. But my name is Donnie Piercey. David, thank you so much for the introduction. If you're interested in following me along on Twitter, I'm at Mr. Piercey, and I have a very difficult to spell last name. I always make my last name one of the first vocabulary words that I have my students look at each year because I've got a hidden E in it. But like David mentioned, I teach 5th grade. It's what I've been doing since 2007. It's what some of us, we switch careers a lot. Some of us, we change maybe grade levels. Oh, I thought I liked K better. I thought I liked 3rd. I have only ever taught 4th or 5th grade, upper elementary. I kind of just fell into it and people said, hey, you seem to be pretty good at it. I loved it. It's what I want to be doing for the rest of my life, or at least till I retire. Probably when I'm 95. I don't know if I want to be teaching 5th grade anymore, but it's what I do. I teach at Stonewall Elementary School in Fayette County. And this is my classroom. And, my classroom, obviously nowadays it's a little bit vacant since we've been so virtual while we're waiting for conditions to improve and we can hopefully safely get back in to the building soon. I'm used to having students there. I miss the days when I have students working on creative writing projects, making, over here, they're making Valentines for the picture in the top right. That's a girl there. She's making Valentines for soldiers that was getting sent out. And probably my favorite part of teaching elementary school is we still have recess. And for you elementary school teachers out there, there's no better feeling in the world. Again, I am not a phenomenal athlete. I can run pretty fast. That's about it. But there's no better feeling in the world than schooling a bunch of 5th graders in football and outrunning them at recess. But to those students, I'm Mr. Piercey. My friends call me Donnie. My wife calls me Donnie. But to those students, I'm Mr. Piercey. And it's over the course of my career, like David mentioned, I've always tried to figure out not only how I can use technology in my classroom, because when you're bringing technology into your instruction, you're going to get that engagement. However, I learned very quickly 14 years ago that just having a shiny new thing in your classroom, whether it be a smart board, I remember when I first got one iPad in my room, or in our PLC in our grade 11, we had to pass it around from team to team. But when I'm thinking about using technology, I'm always somebody who didn't just look for the shiny new thing that I could use to hey, check this out for engagement. Instead, I've always looked for tools that promote student inquiry, promote, have that engagement to it, but ultimately are tools that students can use to create and learn, to promote their learning. So, like David mentioned, I'm originally from Massachusetts. I used to have a thick Boston accent. I don't anymore. And in the year 2000, I decided to go to Asbury College from Massachusetts. Still don't really know exactly why. And graduated in 2004 with a degree in theology. My senior year, I realized that you can't really do much with it. There's usually only one thing that you can do with a theology degree. That really wasn't for me. So my wife said, well, why don't you go back to school? I had worked at summer camps for years, just outside of Boston. And she said, hey, you seem to be pretty good at working with kids. Why don't you go back, get certified to teach? We found some master's programs. And by 2007, I was in my first classroom. And to be honest, I haven't ever looked back from being an elementary school teacher. I've worked all across Kentucky. My first teaching job was in Woodford County. I taught at Simmons Elementary School, 4th and 5th grade for 7 years. I still miss that place. That first classroom that you put together. One of my favorite parts of moving to Kentucky was, usually when I do this talk, I always spend like 3 minutes polling the audience saying, does anybody know how to pronounce the name of this city? And they all say, Versailles. And in Kentucky, it's like, it's Versailles. Come on. Google Maps even gets it wrong, right? But I remember when I first got that teaching job, think back when you first got hired for that first classroom, whether it was 5 months before the first day of school or 5 days before the first day of school, you probably spent all summer prepping for, your classroom. And I'm thankful that I have a picture. I don't know. I mean, this was before smartphones. I had like one of those ones, but I still have a photo of what the inside of my first classroom looked like. And I remember, when you first put your classroom together, I felt like I spent hours just now I need the pennants for the universities that I want them to go to tilted this way. And we had like a country theme going on that year. So I picked England. That's where my ancestors were from. So it's like, okay, well, we can make little English flags and put on the door. And, oh, I'm going to be teaching social studies. So I've got to get copies of the Declaration of Independence, which they all thought was real. And, they'd just seen National Treasure and they thought I'd stole them. And I had to explain to them, no, I'm not a felon. It's okay. But I remember I spent so long putting all of this stuff together that it was the night before the first day of school. And I realized I still wasn't ready. Because turns out, as a teacher, there are these things called lesson plans and figuring out how you're going to, talk to parents and, figuring out, okay, creating email lists and all this. And I'd been so obsessed with just getting my space ready that I never really sat down and thought, okay, what am I actually going to teach these students beyond the first day of school? How am I going to communicate to them beyond, this experience that first week? So I decided, well, you know what? Let's make a website. And maybe you have a classroom website now. Obviously, I think with in the era of COVID, we all have some type of digital space that we're using to communicate to our students. That could be Google Classroom. That could be a Google site that you made. Back in 2007, I actually made a website. It does not exist anymore, but I remember a few years ago, I was looking around and there's actually a website you can go to called the Wayback Machine that'll let you travel back in time on the internet and find old websites that no longer exist. And if you wanted to go and view them, you can nowadays. So this past, or 2 summers ago, rather, I was thinking, I was like, I wonder if I can go find the first blog post that I made for my first class the night before the first day of school. So I dug around a little bit. I remember what my website address was, and I actually went and I found it. And I remember, you can see the timestamp on there. It was the night before the first day of school in 2007. I vividly remember saying like, okay, so I need to put, and by the way, I'm not going to read this to you, but if you look through it, there are a couple of grammar mistakes. I know that, sorry, I can't change it now. And there's one comma that I should have put in there. I was not a believer in the Oxford comma back then. Nowadays I am. But what I always love about reading this post is the same hopes and dreams that I had for my students back in 2007. Yeah, the methods that I go about teaching those students now, I feel like I'm a little bit bit of a better teacher now than I was 14 plus years ago. But the hopes and dreams that I had for my students then are still the same hopes and dreams that I have for every student who comes into my classroom nowadays. And I really hope for all of us that are still in the classroom, all of us that are still in school buildings, and all of us that, regardless of what we do, that we still keep students first. But anyway, so that first semester of teaching, there were really two lessons that I learned. You know, I feel like I'm a pretty reflective person. And the first lesson that I learned from that first semester of teaching, yeah, so this is not my desk, but I think I learned very quickly that, yeah, so I suck at paperwork. You know, anybody else, maybe that's your thing, right? And it was actually like it was me realizing this about myself, that, you know, within about 2 weeks, my desk looked like this, that I needed to try to find some more digital options to try to, you know, keep down the clutter. But the second option, or the second realization that I had about teaching was I really needed to learn to value the time that I spent with my friends and my family. I learned very, very quickly that teaching and education in general, regardless of what your position is, can consume every waking minute of your life. And learning how to set boundaries, you know, not responding to all emails right away, even sometimes just turning those notifications off on your phone, can work wonders for your mental health, and also can long-term make you a better teacher. Because there's some people that these are people that I kind of enjoy seeing from time to time. You know, we probably all have, whether it's friends or family, spouses, kids. And I always like to introduce people to my family because I think they're pretty cool. And one day when they become super famous and change the world, y'all can go, ooh, I heard Mr. Piercey talk about that in his keynote one. So this is my son, Hank. He's actually turning 7 today. He's a ginger, by the way. I do not have red hair. Everyone on my wife's side does. And here on the right, that's my daughter, Scarlett. That's actually her on her 8th birthday. She's going to turn 9th this summer. Here in the middle, this is our 1-year-old doing her, oh my gosh, face. She's 1, right? She's super cute. And then here, this right here, yeah, this is my smoking hot wife. And can everybody say hello to my smoking hot wife? Yeah, I'm kind of biased though. I'll admit that. But my second term of teaching, though, things got a little better. Now, you know, it was kind of like when we all were kind of thrust into this virtual environment last March. It was definitely it was not an easy transition, but I had an experience as a teacher that changed my profession. And it all started in that January when I got an email that changed my practice as an educator. I feel like we all have that one moment, right, that we go and reflect on, where we're like, oh, this is the thing that I remember changed my life as a teacher. It might be a conference, it might be a book that we read. Mine was an email that I received. And the email just basically, I'm not gonna read it to you, but in a nutshell, it just said, hey, I'm a primary teacher in Versailles, France. I was teaching in Versailles, Kentucky at the time. And they, you know, from the email, it looked like they were reaching out to classroom teachers to try to do like a pen pal program where the two classes would write to one another. And of course, in my mind, first year teacher, you know, I was a little anxious. You know, the internet was still kind of new in schools. And, you know, there are two things that I noticed. First, it was coming from like an AOL account, which even in 2007, it's like, come on, right? And then, you know, the whole thing was a little suspicious. My warning signs start going off. I'm like, this has got to be a scam. You know, for those of us that know what Lost in Space is, I was like, danger, Will Robinson. You know, this is just weird. You know, I'd seen those Nigerian print schemes before. And as first year teacher, I did not want to fall into the trap. But anyway, so my students were interested in Google Maps had just come online. Google Earth had just come online. And so they said, well, where's Versailles, France? So we looked again, this is not a screenshot from, you know, 14 years ago. This is a screenshot from what it looks like now. But we looked up and, you know, we looked at Versailles, France. We looked at Versailles, Kentucky. And we realized that there's two things, or one thing that we have in common. In Versailles, they have a palace. in Versailles, we sort of have had a palace. But my students were like, look, Ms. Pierce, we know you don't think this is real, but we would still like to write them a letter. You don't have to put your address on it. We don't really have to send them any money or anything. Let's just, can we, as a small group of kids, just write a letter and send it to them? I'm like, fine. So, I should have taken a picture of the letter before we sent it, before I sent it to them. But basically, it looks something like this. It was not something that was well polished. And I'm 100% sure that they misspelled my last name in there because, that's how it went. We also threw in this letter that we were sending. It was not a new, but it was like a graying Simmons Elementary t-shirt. And I like beef jerky. And they said, well, my dad works. Can we send him some Mingy? Sure, we can send him some Mingy beef jerky. So we sent the letter and I went back to teaching. And, a couple of weeks went by, 3 or 4 weeks went by, and nothing happened. In my mind, I'm like, see, guys, I told you this wasn't real. And then one afternoon, I get a call. Miss Piercy, can you come up to the office? There's something up here. And in my mind, I'm like, uh-oh. So I head up there and I find this envelope. And in addition to this envelope, I also found several large boxes full of French chocolates and treats. And in addition to that, there were also handwritten letters. And I distinctly remember, this was the first time I ever did this as a professional, saying out loud in the office, oops, yeah, so ruin that joke. But not only inside of that envelope were handwritten letters in English, in cursive, where these students had taken probably hours telling us about themselves, where they were, what they did. And my students, of course, they couldn't read cursive. They were 4th graders at the time. They're like, I don't know what this means. And I felt like, oh man, I missed a moment there. And so it was kind of at that moment when I decided I did not want my class or my students to miss another opportunity. So I decided that I was going to adopt a new classroom creed. Now, this is something I did not, I did not start watching this show until well after this. But when I heard this quote, I said, that is what I want the experience in my classroom and what I want school to be like. Maybe you've seen the show 30 Rock, maybe you know this scene, but it was around then I started to develop my classroom creed, which Tracy Morgan / Tracy Jordan nails beautifully.
Okay, so here's some advice I wish I would have got when I was your age. Live every week like it's Shark Week.
And by the way, when I'm talking about Shark Week in the classroom, by the way, I do put that on my board whenever this is kind of a nice little reminder to myself. But, when I'm talking about Shark Week, I'm not talking about like those ones like, oh, the beautiful nurse sharks swimming along the water, or who look at those majestic whale sharks, which are amazing, right? But when I'm talking about bringing Shark Week to my classroom, there's only one part of Shark Week that sucks you in every single time. Right? Who doesn't like to see that? And by the way, please don't misunderstand that analogy. Like, it's not like, don't think like, oh, that's meant to be you. And then like, that's meant to be that student. That's not where I'm going. But if you think about what makes Shark Week great every year, even if you don't have the Discovery Channel, which the Discovery Channel nowadays, by the way, is totally not what Discovery Channel was when I was a kid. Little aside, Shark Week, it's all about just things being different. And when students walk into my classroom, when students walk into your classroom, I hope that it just feels like a different experience. Your classroom and my classroom, we teach differently. We all come from different experiences, different backgrounds. We all are creative in our own different ways. And, I want my classroom to feel like a different, welcoming space. So I decided that I was just going to start doing things differently. That's not to say I don't teach content. I do. Like, I don't want to get fired, right? None of us do. But I realized that there's creative approaches that we as teachers can take to increase engagement, make students, or not to make, but to encourage, to show students that learning doesn't have to be one way. You know, for example, I used to do that when I first started teaching. You know, you do that thing like you have like a classroom economy, and like you print off fake money and you put like your face on it, and you put your principal on the $100 bill because you want her to feel good, you know, and you every time, you know, it's Friday, it's payday, I'm going to pass this out. And, you know, I did that for a while. And then, of course, kids realized like, hey, we can just print off our own money. And, you know, now they're stealing from each other. And I'm pretty sure one year I did that, my students had like an illegal, like, I don't know, like recess poker game going on. So I stopped passing out paper money. And I found this site right here. It's called mykidsbank.org. Super cool. But what it does, it allows you to create an online bank account for your kids. They have for your students, they have a password. And what I love about this site, it has automatic direct deposit. It even has interest. And so, you know, I use this to run my class store. My students get paid through it. We can do it bonus cash and all that. Super fun. But I was like, wait, hold on. If we're gonna like make this seem like a real experience, because think about it, in the real world, when you get paid, your principal doesn't walk in with a large sack of cash and put it on your desk like, here you go, here's your sign, right? So I was like, well, let's try to make this experience of a classroom economy as realistic as possible. So, you know, I charge my students rent once a month for their desks, which is, some of them do not like. And I said, well, I'm trying to teach you that in the real world, you actually, you know, things aren't always, you can't just live anywhere. You actually have to save money, budget your money. You know, you can't just be buying those king size Reese's in the class store all the time. And by the way, we are doing the virtual rent. We are doing this, even though we're in remote school, I'm still charging my kids rent. I'm just telling them they're paying for their summer homes that we have not been in yet, right? But, you know, I've just tried to do things differently in my classroom. You know, I've had students who, through some 20-time projects, some of you might call it Genius Hour. You know, my students, they prototype, they design things. I had a student one year that was like, he was watching some videos on YouTube and he was like, Mr. Piercey, I think I know how to make a forge. And of course, I'm like, what's a forge? He's like, you know that thing where like you can melt stuff and turn it into stuff. And I said, okay, cool. Go make a forge. So he made one. And again, I should have included pictures of it. But, you know, it's basically something that could recycle old aluminum cans. You could put it in mold. And it was just a leaf blower and a blowtorch and a bucket and some concrete. Super cool. One year I had a student was looking around and he stumbled across this. He's like, Miss Pierce, you got to see this thing. So, you know, he calls me over and he's like, it's called a pancake bot. I'm like, what is a pancake bot? He's like, well, you've heard of a 3D printer. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, a pancake bot lets you design stuff on a pancake griddle on a computer. And then you can plug your computer into the pancake bot and it 3D prints pancakes for you that you can eat. So, you know, we got a grant, we bought one. And in my mind, I'm like, this is going to be awesome. Every Friday, it's going to be like design your own pancake day. And, you know, it was really cool. It was the best T-Rex pancake I've ever eaten. And then we realized that, you know, it takes like 20 minutes to make one pancake. So my dream of having a class, you know, class T-Rex pancake party definitely fell by the wayside. But again, I just try to do things differently on Halloween every year. You know, book character day, super fun, right? But that's something that every kid, you know, they've been doing that since kindergarten. So when they get to 5th grade, I assign my 5th graders difficult words out of the dictionary that they don't know. And I say, okay, your challenge is on Halloween this year to come to school dressed as that word. And this is one of my all-time favorite ones. This is incognito, right? Super fun. But we do this every year. And it's kind of turned into a tradition now. You know, kids wear signs. And when we walk from class to class, the students, they always turn their signs around and see if the other teachers or their, you know, the adults who know the word, see if they can guess what their word is. And I have to admit, sometimes you know, you have to resist that temptation to assign certain students certain words. It's like, oh, yes, you're going to be lethargic, and you you're going to be lackadaisical. Yeah, don't do that. But anyway, so I do have one last experience, right? I've learned that when your classroom is different, students will remember it. So, you know, some of you jumped on early and heard Mr. David talking about how, you know, I've kind of always been obsessed with, you know, this idea of virtual reality, at least over the last 7 years. And I was fortunate to work in a district for 4 years, worked in Eminence, Kentucky for 4 years, that actually had like VR kits, which was super fun. But as my students were using them, they're like, well, okay, Mr. Piercey, this is cool, but how on earth can we make our own? Right? That's one of the things I've always looked for with technology. It's not just consumption. Hey, let's just look at stuff. Well, how can you use an app? How can you use a tool to create? So my students, they were looking at these VR, like street view images. And, you know, they said, well, how does Google make these? And so we looked and we found that there's these things called trekker bags. Maybe you've seen like the Google Maps car. Well, these trekker bags, like big backpacks that you can wear. And of course, one of my students was like, oh, let's buy one. And we looked it up. They're about $25,000, which, you know, that's not exactly in the teacher budget, right? That's not in the school budget. But one of my students was like, hey, listen, I looked online. I found that you can buy, oh, I don't have it with me today. I'm sorry. You can buy 360 cameras for a couple $100, super small, about this big. And can I borrow a backpack, a tripod, and the 360 camera? I've got an idea. So my student goes, gets the tiny 360 camera, grabs the tripod, grabs a backpack, and creates this, right? And I'm like, what is it? He's like, well, it's a 360 camera. Now we can go and map out our neighborhood. Because the day before, they had been working on they've been looking at some images on Google Street View of Eminence, where we lived. And they realized that the Google Maps imagery was ridiculously out of date. So we actually turned it into an STLP project. Maybe some of you are involved in the STLP program. And for weeks, every Monday after school, we would just go walking through the neighborhood and uploading these 360 images to Google Maps. They loved it. They had a ball. When the state championship rolled around, we submitted it as part of an STLP project. You know, they were on top of the world. They felt like, oh man, we're like Google Mappers up here. It's super cool, right? And if you've ever done STLP, you kind of know how it works, right? It's like a science fair. Judges come around. The first round of judges come around, and we ended up making it to the next round of judging. And the judges kept coming back, and we made it to the next round of judging. And they came back again. We ended up making it to the top 10. And, you know, at this point, my students, you know, they're 10, so they don't really know what's going on. And I said, guys, you know, I think there's a chance that that you might win this thing. And they were like, no, you know, this is a stupid project. But one of the proudest moments of my teaching career was 4+ years ago, you know, when my 4 super nerds here, who just on a whim decided, hey, let's see if we can figure out how to make one of these 360 cameras. They actually ended up winning the state championship for STLP. Super cool. They loved it. Of course, they thought the only thing that they were going to win was this, like, you know, plastic trophy that was passed out. But we actually got to travel to San Antonio to go to the ISTE conference in 2017. Some of the Google Earth team actually heard about their project and invited them to come and present at the Google booth for a while. And for my students, it was a transformational experience. So I want to end with this question, right? Whether you're someone who's super techie or not, every classroom should feel like a different, welcoming experience. So what is it that you do? What is it that makes your space for each student who comes in there something different, something special, so that students can have fun in school again? All right. Thank you so much. Yay. All right. I never know how to end these things, so I'm just going to, just like, you know, applause. I don't know.